hunger, unemployment, inequality. When you hear these words, the first image that comes to mind is probably South America, or perhaps a country in Africa, but almost never Europe, right? After all, the old continent has always been sold as a place of wealth. Crowded cafes in Paris, high-speed trains crossing borders, tourists filling historic squares, shiny shop windows in London and Berlin. But that's only part of the story. In recent years, poverty has grown to worrying levels there. Today, more than 90 million Europeans, or 1 in 5 inhabitants, live at risk of poverty or social exclusion. We are talking about entire families who have to choose between paying the rent or filling the fridge. Young people who pack their bags because they see no future at home. Children who grow up without the basics guaranteed. A Europe where wages are low, jobs are scarce, and the cost of living is suffocating. That is why, in today's Bello Mundo, we are going to look at the ranking of the 10 poorest countries in Europe, according to World Bank indicators. The part of the continent that almost never comes up when talking about prosperity. Number 10. Bulgaria. Our journey through the poorest parts of Europe begins on the Balkan coast, specifically in Bulgaria, a country with a 1,000-year history that has been through the Byzantine Empire, centuries of Ottoman rule, and decades of communism. Today, this nation is part of the European Union. But that hasn't worked miracles. Bulgaria's GDP per capita is around $17,000, which places it among the poorest countries in Europe. And despite being part of the European bloc since 2007, inequality remains a hallmark. Much of the problem stems from endemic corruption and the difficulty in modernizing the economy. While cities like Sofia and Plovdiv are trying to open up to the technology sector, the interior remains trapped in neglect. Closed schools, underfunded hospitals, and villages that seem to have stopped in time. With this lack of opportunity, many people don't think twice. They pack their bags and leave. Young people and skilled professionals prefer to try their luck in Germany, France, or anywhere else. Those who stay feel the weight of their absence, an emptied community, a stagnant economy, poverty that won't go away. It is a clear picture of how being in the European Union does not, in itself, guarantee prosperity. Number 9. Montenegro. 2 steps further and we reach the Balkan coast in Montenegro, a tiny country with less than 1 million inhabitants, which still goes unnoticed by many people. At first glance, it seems to live only on its landscape. It is blue sea, green mountains, and a medieval city that looks like a postcard. But you only need to look a little beyond the landscape to realize that life here is not so perfect. The GDP per capita is around $13,000, less than a third of the European Union average, which is over $40,000. And the thing is, much of this income comes from tourism. It is the hotels, restaurants, and crowded beaches that drive the country's economy. When the pandemic shut down this sector, the entire economy took a dive. And here comes the hardest part. Even when tourism is strong, wealth is not spread around. It is concentrated on the coast, in cities geared towards visitors. The north of the country, on the other hand, suffers from high unemployment and scarce opportunities. It is as if there were 2 Montenegros, one a tourist showcase and the other forgotten, outside the travel brochures. Some believe that things will improve and that poverty rates will fall in the coming years. But for now, those who live far from the trendy beaches face a reality far removed from the paradise that the country sells. Number 8. Albania. Right next to Italy and just above Greece, Albania is a surprise that many people have yet to discover. To give you an idea, the country's coastline looks like a piece of the Caribbean in the middle of Europe. Crystal clear sea, white sand, and very low prices. A paradise that is still largely unexplored. No wonder more and more Italian and Greek tourists are crossing the border to enjoy the Albanian summer that seems to never end. But Albania has not always been such an inviting destination. Until the 1980s, the country lived under one of the most closed dictatorships on the continent, led by Enver Hoxha. The regime's paranoia was so great that it spread thousands of concrete bunkers across the territory, built to resist invasions that never happened. The result, decades of isolation and an economy that stood still in time. And this legacy weighs heavily to this day. Per capita GDP is around $10,100, one of the lowest in Europe. Salaries remain modest, unemployment mainly affects young people, and many of them prefer to try their luck in Italy or Greece, leaving entire cities empty. In other words, Albania enchants those who visit, but for those born there, life is still a challenge. Number 7. North Macedonia. North Macedonia is the kind of country that holds hidden treasures. Lake Ohrid, for example, is one of the oldest on the planet, surrounded by mountains and medieval villages that look like something out of a fairy tale. It is the kind of setting that makes any visitor swear they have discovered a secret gem of Europe. But behind this beauty, the life of Macedonians is not easy. The country's GDP per capita is around $9,300, which keeps it among the poorest on the continent. The economy is small, fragile, and heavily dependent on sectors such as agriculture and light industry, which are unable to generate enough jobs. Another issue is unemployment, which has always been a specter there. Although rates have fallen in recent years, they are still well above the European average, especially among young people. This fuels a cycle of constant emigration. Many prefer to try their luck in richer neighboring countries, such as Greece and Germany, rather than face the lack of prospects at home. Number 6. Georgia. Our journey now takes us to the Caucasus, where Europe meets Asia. And that is where Georgia is located, one of the most impressive places on the continent. But before continuing, it is worth clarifying a very common confusion. When many people hear Georgia, they immediately think of the U.S. state in the southeastern United States. But the Georgia we are talking about here is another. It is a European country, a former Soviet republic, located in the far east of the continent. And this Georgia is breathtaking. Snow-capped mountains, vineyards that tell stories of thousands of years, and cities like Tbilisi, where mosques, churches, and thermal baths coexist side by side. A mosaic of Russian, Persian, and Ottoman influences makes the country a unique destination in Europe. However, behind this beauty, the reality is not so enchanting. The GDP per capita is around $9,100, one of the lowest in the region. Modest salaries, poor infrastructure in rural areas, and persistent unemployment push many Georgians to seek opportunities outside the country. Since independence in 1991, Georgia has accumulated political crises, separatist wars, and instability that have held back growth. Even with tourism growing and the fame of Georgian wines spreading around the world, the economy has not yet managed to turn the tide. Number 5. Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now we arrive in a country that still bears recent scars. Bosnia and Herzegovina. At first glance, one might be enchanted by multicultural Sarajevo, with its mosques and churches sharing the same skyline, or by the breathtaking postcard view of the Mostar Bridge. But one need only look a little deeper to understand that the war of the 90s still weighs heavily on the present. The Bosnian economy has never fully recovered from the conflict. Per capita GDP is around $8,900. But what does that mean in practice? Low wages, unemployment still in double digits, and young people who see more of a future outside the country than inside. In addition to the economic issue, there is a political complication. The country is divided between different ethnic groups, which creates a fragmented, slow, and often paralyzed system of government. The consequence is clear. Projects stall, investments fail to materialize, and the feeling of instability drives away those who could bring jobs and income. And there is another detail that helps explain the impoverishment: mass emigration. Every year, thousands of Bosnians leave the country for Germany, Austria, and Scandinavia, taking with them the most skilled workforce. What remains is a territory that seems stuck in time, trying to balance memories of war with the difficulty of building a more prosperous future. A living example of how, sometimes, the past insists on charging interest on the present. Number 4. Armenia. Moving forward on the map, we arrive at Armenia, a small country in terms of territory, but a giant in terms of history. It was here in the 4th century that Christianity became the official religion for the first time anywhere in the world. To this day, stone monasteries are scattered across valleys and mountains, witnesses to an ancient culture that has resisted empires and invasions from all sides. But if Armenia's past is impressive, its present is much more difficult. The country's GDP per capita is around $8,500, which for the population means low wages, scarce opportunities, and a cost of living that, in cities such as the capital, Yerevan, is growing much faster than incomes. Add to this a country with a complicated geopolitical scenario. The conflict with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region has drained resources and created instability, driving away investments that could boost the economy. In addition, Armenia is a landlocked country, which limits trade and makes imports more expensive. An interesting detail is that much of the Armenian economy survives thanks to remittances sent by emigrants. Thousands of Armenians live and work in Russia, the United States, and European countries, sending money back to support their families. In some years, these remittances have accounted for more than 20% of GDP. Number 3. Moldova. Now reaching the podium, occupying the top 3 in our ranking, is Moldova, a country squeezed between Romania and Ukraine, landlocked and with just over 2.5 million inhabitants. At first glance, it seems like a peaceful place, with fertile fields, famous vineyards, and villages that have stopped in time. But the reality is quite different. What has really stood still in time is the GDP per capita, which barely exceeds $7,600, one of the lowest on the entire continent. Much of this fragility comes from the Soviet legacy and the lack of strategic natural resources. Without a strong industry and with little economic diversification, the country is heavily dependent on agriculture and, above all, on the money sent by those who have left. It is estimated that more than a quarter of Moldova's GDP comes from remittances from emigrants living in Italy, Russia, or other parts of Europe. And life in the country is not easy. Wages are low, job opportunities are scarce, and many young people see no other way out than to migrate. To make matters worse, political instability and the dispute over the separatist region of Transnistria add an extra layer of uncertainty to the future. Number 2. Kosovo. Taking the silver medal, we now have one of the youngest countries in Europe. Kosovo declared independence in 2008 after years of conflict and tension with Serbia. Even today, its sovereignty is not recognized by everyone, but even so, the territory continues to try to establish itself as a nation. And for those who visit, the country is quite surprising. Imposing mountains, historic cities such as Pristina and Prizren, a vibrant cultural scene, and welcoming people. But just look at the numbers to understand why Kosovo is among the poorest in Europe. Per capita, GDP is barely over $7,200, and the central problem is that the economy is extremely fragile. The country depends largely on remittances sent by immigrants living in Western European countries. In other words, much of the money circulating here is not generated internally, but sent by those who have left the country. In addition, unemployment continues to be a specter that haunts virtually every family. Among young people, rates are extremely high, fueling a cycle of emigration that only worsens the situation. The most qualified leave, and the country loses even more productive strength. Kosovo also faces difficulties in attracting foreign investment, largely because of political instability and a lack of full recognition on the international stage. This hinders trade agreements, limits partnerships, and leaves the economy hostage to small sectors. Number 1. Ukraine. And to end this unglamorous tour, we now come to our top spot, and taking the gold medal in the ranking of the poorest countries in Europe is Ukraine, the largest country entirely located in Europe, a land of fertile fields that have earned it the nickname breadbasket of Europe, historic cities such as Kiev and Lviv, and a vibrant culture that blends Slavic, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian traditions. In times of peace, it could be synonymous with prosperity. But the present is very different. The war that began in 2022 destroyed factories, roads, homes, and schools. Millions of people were forced to leave their homes, and the economy has never been the same. Per capita GDP is around $5,300, one of the lowest in Europe. And poverty has skyrocketed. Today, almost a third of the population lives in poverty. Children grow up without the basics. Entire families depend on humanitarian aid. And in the countryside, poverty is even harsher than in the big cities. The contrast is cruel. On the one hand, a country rich in arable land and natural resources. On the other, people who struggle every day against inflation, destruction, and uncertainty. Ukraine is at the same time a place of immense potential and open wounds that will take time to heal. Thus, Ukraine bears the unenviable title of the poorest country in Europe, a land of rich culture and warm hospitality, but one that, economically, is still far from bringing prosperity to its people. And so we end this journey through the poorest countries of the old continent. Did you imagine that these places would be in the ranking? Do you know anyone who lives in one of them or has even lived there and can tell you what that experience is like? Share it with us in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.